our panelists today is really made up of some unique, we have some entrepreneurs, some people that have been doing due diligence directly, a couple of fund people, some double bottom line, which is awesome to hear about today, and then Amy, who's going to be moderating the panel. Amy Rosen, to my left, Wildstein, is a managing partner of Springboard Growth Capital. She has over 20 years of direct private investment experience. She started her career at Blackstone, working with principal investments as well as mergers and acquisition. She subsequently joined Morgan Stanley Capital Partners, where she evaluated and structured investments in the firm's $2 billion investment fund, focusing on buyouts and growth equity investments across a range of industries, including consumer, media, and healthcare. She's the founder of Solera Capital, an investment fund launched in '99 by a team of all women. She was involved with fund formation, raising capital by a team of women, and development of the fund's investment strategy. In 2001, she co-founded Bold Cap Ventures, an investment club comprising of all women investors in and around New York area. She served as a fund manager of Bold Cap since its formation, focusing on early to mid-stage companies in media, technology, and life sciences. She's done a lot. And today, she's going to be our moderator. And hopefully they'll all introduce themselves a little bit as they go through and what they're doing, but she's got some great questions. And then we want to get everybody involved as much as we can. It's a large group. We have little time, and they have a lot to say. So hopefully if you guys have questions, we're going to do it throughout the process so that we keep it on track, but ask your questions at the time you have them. So Amy will kind of...
Hi, thank you, Darcy, for the introduction. And is this microphone working? Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, so as Darcy kind of went through my background, I started in private equity about 24 years ago, right out of college. Didn't even know what private equity was, but was fortunate enough to get exposure to it at Blackstone. At the time, it was just 35 people. When I was interviewing, there was one woman VP, and by the time I started, she had left, and there weren't any women there at that time. Wasn't that odd, because it was a small firm, but I was sort of just looking for a woman, one or two, at least just sort of someone sort of showing what it might look like in terms of just personal style and just how someone might have made it work, you know, for themselves. So I moved over to Morgan Stanley a couple of years later into the private equity unit, kind of thinking in a big institution there may be some more women role models, and certainly there were a lot more women in the firm, but not necessarily in private equity. I was at Morgan Stanley for about 5 years and left to join an all-women team at Solera Capital, looking to really leverage a network of women executives, and through that met my current partner, Kay Koplovitz, who was launching at the time Springboard Enterprises, a national nonprofit to help women entrepreneurs access institutional capital. So I've been involved with Springboard Enterprises since inception, and am currently involved in Springboard Growth Capital. I'm launching an investment business to really leverage the network and relationships and deal flow coming out of Springboard Enterprises, which is a portfolio of over 600 women-led companies that have come through an accelerator program and have raised in aggregate over $7 billion in funding. We've made our first investment through Springboard Growth Capital in partnership with DBL and Cynthia Ringo, and Joan Fallon, who's at the end, is one of our many esteemed Springboard Entrepreneurs alumni and is also an investor in Springboard Growth Capital. So anyway, this is really your hour. We're going to kind of go through and have everyone on the panel introduce themselves, and then we have a few questions to kind of launch the discussion, and then really just encourage you all to kind of keep it interactive and let us know from your perspective sort of what's most useful to talk about.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Ringo. I'm a managing partner at DBL Investors. It's an impact investing venture firm. We've been doing impact investing for 14 years. We've raised 3 funds and have about $650 million under management at this time. We've been fortunate to work with some wonderful entrepreneurs and have some very iconic companies in our portfolio. including Tesla Motors, and I actually own car number 18. Talk about a risk. Our firm, 2 of the 3 senior partners are women, and I think that has had a big impact on our deal flow. My partner Nancy and I have both been in tech our whole careers. Prior to becoming a venture capitalist 14 years ago, I was a serial entrepreneur and founded several venture-backed startup companies.
I'm Will Poole. In addition to being the minority guy on the panel, I'm also minority LP investor in the panel, so I represent this fund investing side of this discussion. My background is in the handout, but fundamentally I'm a 25-year tech veteran. Spent the last half of my career at Microsoft after they acquired my company. Ran an increasingly irrelevant but rather large business there called Windows. When I left there, I was pretty hooked on this idea of impact investing. I was doing it from within the company previously. I said I want to go out and do this on my own account and with others. And over the course of a circuitous path, started what is now India's most active seed impact fund called the United Seed Fund, and then wanted to scale that globally and started a program about a year ago called Capria, where we find fund managers and support them at the GP level, as well as invest in them as an LP and help them succeed in emerging markets in impact.
My name is Barbara Rejo. I'm a managing director of Golden Seeds. I'm also here as a private investor. I left Philadelphia in 1978 with an MBA in finance and founder stock in Urban Outfitters. And went to work for a corporation, thinking I was going to make my fortune, and worked for 5 years and didn't make my fortune, and then stepped out of the workforce for a number of years to raise a family. But Urban went public in 1993, and that's when I became an investor. And then I joined Golden Seeds in 2007, and I've been investing with Golden Seeds since then, and done investing through Golden Seeds and through other organizations during that time. We invested, Golden Seeds, by the way, is an angel investment group that invests in early stage companies that are founded or run by women.
I have my own. My very own.
One more thing I want to say. So when I joined Golden Seeds, it was Golden Seeds was really founded to provide women more equal access to capital. But in fact, I was impact investing when I joined Golden Seeds, and now everybody says that, but it wasn't so at the time.
So I'm Joan Fallon, and I'm both an entrepreneur and an investor, but mainly right now I'm an entrepreneur who's running a company, the CEO of a company called CureMark, and we are a sort of an early company with a very late stage indication for autism, with a platform technology. When we started our work, there were 7 or 8 drugs that were in clinical trials. Now there's basically us left. And there was no venture capital at all in autism. There still isn't. And so there's very little development in the field. But we had to raise all of our money privately. And so so we were able to raise, the count is about now up to $100 million in basically 9 years to fund the company, get through the clinical trials.
Great. Well, I thought we'd start with just the kind of broad question about sort of what really is impact investing. How do you define it? What are some of the ways to put together metrics, to present them, to present success, to present the success in addition to the financial return? Joan, maybe you could kind of start, and we can just get some input from all the panelists, but just from your perspective, how have you been able to create metrics and milestones along the way as you raised $100 million, which is very impressive.
Thank you. I think that we were recently at a UBS philanthropy group, Amy and I, and one of the things came up about impact investing. And in autism, it's a huge impact, not just on the child, but on the family, on the school system, on the community, basically on our GDP, right? And someone there said to me, well, you're not impacting the environment. I said, well, actually, the number of Pampers that are going into the landfills is much less. Oh, yes, okay, so you have impact. So I think that, and that's true. I mean, if it didn't have an environmental piece, it didn't have impact. So that's someone's definition of that. And I think that for us, as we have gone forward and raised money, we've raised money on milestones. Every time we achieved a milestone, we were able to raise more money. And I think that was important for us and important for our investors so they could track the progress through this. I think the larger impact was pretty clear, but I think the milestone money raise was very important for us.
Great. And Cynthia, I know you mentioned taking this very seriously in terms of just setting out the metrics, and it's something that you've developed and that you actively report to your LPs, and if you could talk a little bit about how you define it and how it's worked, and maybe in the context of mentioning some investments, like one I know in particular that doesn't necessarily sound like it would be an impact investment, but how it meets that criteria for you.
Sure. Well, when we first started, we worked with the Ford Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation because there wasn't even something called impact investing at that time. And we called it double bottom line investing. And people say, well, why isn't it triple? Why isn't it quadruple? Why isn't it quintuple? Because in our parlance, whether you're having an environmental impact, a social impact, an economic impact, those are all part of the double bottom line. And with many of our companies, they actually do all three. So what we did was we defined what would success look like and then started measuring that. And it had multiple different indicators. Probably the most important one is job creation. And within job creation, what's the quality of the jobs that are being created? Where are the jobs located? How many of those jobs have what we would consider to be good benefits associated with them? How many opportunities are there for career progression within a company? We measure all those things twice a year with each one of our portfolio companies. We also have a tremendous emphasis on diversity. If the emphasis on diversity isn't there when we invest, we help the companies with programs to change their diversity profile, to eliminate unconscious bias. We do encourage our companies, whenever possible, to locate in low to moderate income areas because there are many benefits associated with that, some of them being economic for the company as well as the community. We work with them on programs that are strategic to the business that do community engagement. So the way I would like to describe that one, unless you're a toy company, a toy drive isn't strategic to your business. So we have companies that are in the medical space, try to find ways. One of them encourages blood donors. So and organ donors. So there are many things that the companies can do that are in fact measurable, and then there are some that are not really measurable, but they're qualitative. The company that Amy's referring to is one of them is The Real Real. And you might say, well, why is that an impact investment? It's a consignment business for luxury goods. It's also a recycling business. It's a business that has created more than 500 jobs, and the bulk of them are for women. And many of the women there, it's the first quality job that they've ever had, and they're very active workforce development programs so that people can progress in their careers. And there's also a tremendous commitment to philanthropic and community engagement activities within that company.
Great. Will, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just add, and I agree with the points made so far, and with our direct work in India, we use the same way of thinking about it, looking at jobs and also the general concept of lives touched. How are you helping, for example, a device that does a breast cancer screening for a rural woman? That's an impact that we want to count and do lots of them. But when we've been working with our program with Capria globally, we've been seeing proposals from fund managers all over the world who each have very different views of what impact is, and some of them don't even call themselves impact investors, but they have impact. And so we've adopted very much of a non-judgmental view of saying, what we're looking for is measurable, like everybody else is saying, and intentional, and relevant in the local context and time. And time is important. So for example, creating something that helps an entrepreneurial ecosystem outside of Istanbul has quite a bit of impact on the local economy there. If you help the same entrepreneurial ecosystem in Silicon Valley or Bangalore, not so much impact, maybe none. So we think about the time and place as well as measurability and intentionality in impact.
So one thing I'll say is, as I said, we always are, investing in women, and so that's the lens that I look through in terms of impact investing mostly, and more social impact recently. But a study by First Round Capital that was published, it was 10 years of investing with them, showed that women-led or diverse, gender-diverse management teams produced greater returns. So as investors, I think that's something that we're all interested in, and so that's sort of the things that I think is important about investing in women.
Yeah, for me, that's particularly interesting, and just something that we've grappled with in even just forming Springboard Growth Capital, and just asking ourselves the question: is it impact investing? Backing women by definition, impact, and sort of what are some other metrics and criteria that we could use to help guide and define our success, in addition to financial return, which is really the first and most basic tenet of it. We can go ahead and take.
Are we taking questions?
Yes, sure.
Thanks. Amanda Kaiser with BLAT, and I think one of the things that we are thinking about with some of the fund managers we work with is helping them move from measurement to management. And it sounds like the investors on the panel, like you all are already making that a core component of your dialogue with the companies or with the GPs that you invest in. But would be curious if there's particular value add that really resonates with the companies or the GPs that you work with, that say this is not just about compliance, this is not about reporting on a biannual basis, but here's like a meaningful way in which we're engaging their company around impact.
I give a great example of that. One of our investees in India provides drivers on demand. Not a car with a driver, but a driver for your car. Turns out most of their customers are women going out shopping for the day, don't want to deal with traffic, kids, whatever. They also do late night drink and drive avoidance, things like that. But they started measuring the increase in income of their drivers when they start working with them. And their income about doubles in the first month. And so they then said, well, this is a competitive weapon for us versus whatever those drivers, because everybody's competing for supply of labor. So they're able to then, by measuring that impact, they're able to go back to the drivers and say, hey, here's our broad group of drivers, their income about doubles, and they go from X to Y. And by the way, if you drive more than X hours per week, we also give you health insurance. Also has very positive impact on the whole family. So they're actually using that core measurement of impact as a sales tool for them in securing their supply chain.
Well, I can't comment on it in terms of investing in other managers, because we are a manager. I can tell you that the reputation of having been doing this for a long time, and entrepreneurs being able to see the success and talk to other entrepreneurs about how did DBL help you? And there are things that I call table stakes. It's what every good venture capitalist has to do. We have to do all that, So helping with strategy, fundraising, recruiting, all those things are table stakes. What usually, though, happens is there's something that the CEO is incredibly passionate about, and they want help figuring out, how do I do that? So in one of our companies, the CEO is a first-generation immigrant and has a PhD and is incredibly passionate about the value of education. So we helped them to set up a program that funded sponsorships in the area where they had built a factory in Mississippi that was a very depressed economy. And they've now put 8 kids through 4-year colleges in science and engineering.
Anyone else have other burning questions? Okay, so while you're all thinking about it, one of the topics that we were supposed to talk about is just networks and what's the real importance? How do you use networks to drive deal flow and make better investment decisions? Barbara, perhaps you could lead us off with sort of how Golden Seeds has done that. And what, whatever you care to share in terms of just how the network's really the most valuable, maybe also some of the tools that you use to communicate with the broad network and keep it at its highest level of efficiency.
So Golden Seeds is a nationwide organization, and we have something like 275 members with forums in New York, Boston, Silicon Valley, Texas, and as an emerging group now in SoCal. Because we're an organization that invests in women-run, women-founded companies, those entrepreneurs come to us, and as we become a bigger force, investing more dollars in those companies, we find they come to us even more. In order to nurture that, we offer various things. We do a thing called office hours, where entrepreneurs can come and have 15 minutes to learn to talk to investors, to talk about their business, anything they want to talk about their business. And also they have like a little seminar at the beginning talking about funding for early stage companies. Who do you go to? What do you need to be fundable? How viable is your idea? So we provide education. And then we have a screening process. Anybody who wants to come to Golden Seeds to present applies online. It's a democratic process. You pay a screening fee. And we offer screenings once a month, and then at all forum locations. And then we have a forum, and we select them. So we have a big flow of companies. We see maybe 300 to 500 companies a year that come across the transit for Golden Seeds. So that's and our process. Then they go through the process. It's a big upside down triangle, and the companies come in at the top, and they go through the process. We fund about 2-3% of the companies that come through the process.
And Barbara, is it mostly in the U.S. today?
It's all domestic, yes.
Okay. Will, I don't know if you care to share sort of how you're doing that internationally and.
Well, yeah, I think your question's around the value of the network, and one thing that we had a theory when we launched Capria a year ago that creating a global network of impact fund managers would be valuable. We didn't know just how valuable fund managers would see it, and we've now seen not just first-time fund managers, but second-time fund managers from, again, emerging markets, far-flung places, who say that they see a huge amount of value in being included in a global network. And it helps them in two ways. One is to help them be smarter, because they can connect to other managers who have similar knowledge in other similar markets, but also helps them in their marketing of their offer to local entrepreneurs. So if you're an entrepreneur and you've got manager A and manager B, and one of them is part of a global network or whatever kind of interconnected network, and the other one is not, you're, as an entrepreneur, going to be more attracted to the investor who's got that network behind them, that's going to offer you business development abilities, whatever it might be. So I think that the value of the human networks in impact investing being targeted and helpful to both managers and to entrepreneurs can't be overstated at this time.
Can you talk to, just practically speaking, how you harness the energy of that human capital?
Well, we start with an intensive program, which is 3 or 4 weeks in Seattle, which is quite intense. It's cohort based, and we bring a number of managers together, and they get to know each other, and they get to know us. And our goal is, by the end of that, we know more about them than their spouse or their mom, and that means they know the same about us. And so that really helps to create the bonding at the cohort level. We then are going to do quarterly or semi-annual regional events and annual global events. And those are ways to connect people together in person, as well as having all of the sort of online digital connectivity you'd expect.
So as far as network goes, so Golden Seeds is an angel group. And there's an organization called Angel Capital Association, which is the trade association for all the angel groups in the United States and Canada. So there are maybe 600 angel groups. So we participate in that, and we've also now created sort of an ecosystem committee or group to really help us reach out to all the organizations that do what we do or things that relate to what we do. So our network becomes that, just magnified as we get all these organizations, through, the Northeast, well, throughout the United States, who participate in funding early stage companies.
We have one question in the back.
Yeah, for all of you who manage portfolios, do you have minimum revenue criteria where you won't look at something that has under $1 million of revenue or under $5 million of revenue? And the second question is, how many out of the portfolio companies you're currently managing, how many of them are run by women?
That was a layup. I'll answer the second one first. We have invested in 10 companies out of our third fund. 7 of them are either run by or founded by a woman on the founding team. And we do not have a specific gender mandate. So when you talk about the effect of a network, that is the effect of a network of people that Nancy and I have known over our very long careers. I mean, 24 years, so you clearly have correlation there because we don't have a specific gender mandate. It's one thing that matters to us. We also do not have a minimum revenue threshold. Many of the companies we invest in, at the time we do our first investment, are pre-revenue. The way I like to characterize is that we never intentionally take fundamental technology risk. Never intentionally.
So with our fund that we manage in India, we have 23 portfolio companies, only one of which is run by a woman, but she's in the top decile of our managers, and we keep asking her to help us find more like her. So we're excited about what she's doing. In our work with global impact managers, we have 4 managers, one of which is an all-woman team. They just came through a couple of weeks ago on our second cohort, and we're really excited about them. They come from different countries in Africa with previous fund management experience, and they're doing gender lens investing in Africa. And they will not invest solely in women, though. They've been very clear they're going to invest in teams that are or can be gender diverse and can deliver superior performance as a result of that. And they think they're uniquely able to, if you will, manage that into the investments that they pick. In terms of minimum investments, that is across all the different funds we work with. It varies from 0 up to $1 million in revenue in terms of what's expected. A lot of them are early stage and pre-revenue or just post-revenue, but some of them are growth stage and require some threshold.
So, I'd say, we like to see revenue, at least $1 million in revenue. It depends, so we invest across sectors. So, if it's a drug, sometimes they're pre-revenue. But if it's a consumer product, we'd like to see $1 million in annual run rate. There's flexibility, it's also what's the opportunity to scale, how big is the market? And so I would say we like to invest in companies that have revenue in general. It's not a hard and fast rule.
Yeah, go ahead in the back.
Hi, can I ask a question? So could you just clarify if you're doing equity or debt or both, and what's your history with exits or your experiences?
Let's see. The first question was debt or equity or both. We are pure equity. Okay, we do no debt. We work with many debt providers at appropriate stages in the company's history. Our fund has a track record of top decile financial performance. That does, of course, necessitate exits. I think we've had 7 IPOs. We've had many M&A transactions. We have 3 IPOs in the pipeline right now. And we have a fundamental belief that you can't have big impact unless you can create a big company. Because only when you can really scale the company can you impact many people's lives through the creation of jobs, through the impacting in a positive way the environment, creating wealth in places where there was no wealth. So that's fundamental to our investment thesis. So you have to have exit.
So our fund in India is an early stage fund, and it's young. It's only 4 years old. We've had one exit with a 10x return on there. It's equity. Most of our fund managers globally that we work with are very interested in mezzanine debt and self-liquidating instruments, and so we're teaching them how to use those effectively. We think particularly in emerging markets where there is not a path for either an M&A opportunity and certainly not for an IPO, that a self-liquidating instrument is the right kind of funding mechanism to use. It means you go a little bit later stage, so you have to have enough revenue to support the ultimate liquidation of the debt, but it's good, and it also gives you an equity kicker in the event that you do have some form of a outlier event, and you can make more money there.
So we like to do preferred stocks. There is Series A preferred. We do some convertible notes. It's not the preference, but it happens. In terms of exits, so I joined Golden Seeds in 2007. We all know what happened in 2008. But there were some exits prior to my joining Golden Seeds. It's been in existence for a little more than 10 years now. So there have been some positive exits, depending on when you went in, 8 to 12 times return on investment. Me personally, I have had no, I've had some liquidity events. But they have not been positive. So, and most of the things on portfolio are not that long. And this is a long game. I mean, if you do startup investing, at the Angel Capital Association this year, they said the average time to a really good return is 11 years. So, when they first came, when I first joined Golden Seeds, people would pitch there, and it would say 3 to 5 years. You're going to get 10 times, blah blah blah. And then 2008 happened, and all of a sudden it was 5 to 7 years, and now it's like 7 to 10 years. So.
So, I was just going to make one comment, and then we'll take the next question. So, we're at Springboard Growth Capital, kind of further down in the growth curve. We're looking for companies with minimum revenues of about $20 million that are ready to do a $20 to $25 million financing, generally Series C, D, beyond, and really looking to kind of fill the gap. There are a number of women-focused funds, specifically at the earlier stages, Golden Seeds and others along the curve, and less activity kind of in the growth phase. We're sort of looking for companies that have at least, kind of doubling in terms of revenues and real momentum, but looking to scale. And I think, similar theme to what many of you have said, just the importance of scale, and of course, having a greater impact by having a greater exit. We're looking to kind of back the companies that are positioned to take in more capital to expand on something that's already working. But I wanted to ask about just sort of how you each see and define maybe a bit of the secret sauce that goes into picking the right investments, ruling out the ones that won't be as successful. In terms of getting the exits, it's really all about picking the right companies. So I'm curious whether for you it's about having a narrow industry focus, something that you know really well, narrow definition of stage, potentially investment committee process that really involves input from various people. I'm also curious just about how that process works for different firms in terms of just does it have to be unanimous, or can there be some dissension that will allow for potentially more innovative opportunities that are maybe not as obvious to some, to sort of get through the screening process. But I don't know if each of you can kind of share, just from your own personal perspective, a little bit of the secret sauce behind making good investments. I don't know, Joan, if you want to start maybe just in terms of, I know you look at a lot of investment opportunities individually from that perspective, or even in terms of just how you think institutional investors have, looked at your company.
So I think that from my own private investing, I have found that, and a lot of it, it's an early stage, but not all of it. And I think the diligence process is really important, having someone who can really run that properly and understand what the risks really are. I'm on the investment committee for one of the funds that I invest in, and being able to understand what the experts are telling you, what it's going to take financially to do what someone's telling you. So if an investor tells you it's going to take $2 million and you say it's going to take $10 million, making sure that that discrepancy is accounted for and understood as to why that happens. And on my own side, we do a lot of diligence with different companies, different kinds of people making investments and strategics who would like to buy us, etc. And I think that the diligence process is really key to being able to convey the value that you have as a company. And not only that, but outline very carefully what the risks are for the investors, so that they know where the push points are. So very often, as we do diligence, we actually bring those out, so they're not like having to be uncovered somewhere down the road. So for us, it's really regulatory risk, and what does that look like, and what are those well-established norms for that. And so I think it's important to have as much transparency during diligence and really understand what you're investing in.
I want to be a little controversial on this point, and not to disagree with your points at all, but to say that there's so much of an emphasis placed on due diligence and investing, and from a discussion perspective, and not enough on, in fact, the real work, which is managing the portfolio and getting a return for investors. So just because you've made a good investment doesn't mean you're going to get a good return. And there's a huge amount of work and time also, if you think about it, a number of years, right? So you're talking about from the day that diligence is done and a check is written, it could be anywhere from 8 to 12 years before you're going to start getting an exit. Well, what happens over that time? The answer is not that you're sitting there on the beach sipping your martini, right? You're actually, somebody is going to be managing and helping to ensure that the right things are done with that company, to make sure that they get through tough spots, to create opportunity for them, to make sure that second and third and fourth investment rounds are done with your seat at the table being appropriately represented. And ultimately, when an exit happens, that a good exit happens, and that you are, again, treated commensurately with other investors, and you get that return. So I just hope everybody doesn't get too hung up on the focus on diligence, because it is vital and important, but it is not remotely the whole story.
Great, we have one question over here.
Yeah, I'm Rebecca from Investor Circle, and my question is for Cynthia and Barbara. How have you seen your deal flow change over the history that you've been involved in PBL and Golden Seeds? How has it kind of the makeup of your deal flow changed?
Makeup in what regard?
Just like, are you seeing different sectors or different foci from kind of the time you started 14 years ago to now? Are you seeing different kinds of companies come through?
Well, you're always seeing different kinds of companies because there are different forms of innovation that are occurring, and our world is constantly changing. So part of what we look for is what are trends that are going to go across sectors, not just sector-specific trends. And when you start doing that kind of work, it's like attracts like, and so then you end up seeing more of that, and it makes you hopefully smarter. But on the topic of the management of companies, it's so crucial, and this is the only business that I know of where if you're successful at it, if you're a successful investor in venture capital, for sure, you will be wrong more than you're right, okay? And that has to do with no matter how much diligence you do, there are so many unknowables that you need to be, first of all, comfortable that you're going to go into something with there being many unknowable things, no matter how much diligence you do. Like, you could work on the diligence for 10 years, and there still would be unknowables because the world is changing around you. So this is I always tell people, like, if you want to be a venture capitalist, first of all, you better be humble, because you're going to get humble, because you're going to make a bunch of mistakes, and you're going to regret them, and also, it's just not for the faint of heart. Remember, we're managing risk capital. That means you have to be comfortable with risk.
Yeah, we have another question.
I had a question that related to both of your last comments, which is, how do you assess the management teams? Because I think a lot of times in investing, you're really coming down to focusing in and taking a risk, once you've done all your externality, on the quality of decision-making of the team.
It's probably the single hardest thing that any investor does. And if you're an early stage investor, and I think it's a little different calculation for later stage, but as an early stage investor, you're investing more in the management team and the CEO, him or herself, than you are in almost anything else. I can just tell you from my personal startup experience, having started 5 companies, 2 of which failed, but the 2 that failed, I turned them into one that succeeded afterwards. And so that's part of what good entrepreneurs do, is they find success in failure, or they find greater success in moderate success. And so you need to be able to pick people that have that kind of capability. It's no small task, and it certainly has got to be done with a combination of references, of looking what their past experience is, talking to other people that know them and understand them. It's not based on pedigree. And it's not based on purely on idea, right? A bad entrepreneur with a good idea will go nowhere.
How does your program that you put them through in Washington help you assess it? Are there tools that you use?
Yeah, so this is for fund managers, not for entrepreneurs, but they're entrepreneurs who are fund managers we run with Capria. And that is one of our biggest questions, is how do we assess them? And we had a PhD psychologist work with us for a year on a framework for assessing. We look for things like grit, right? Do they have the ability to see things through? Obviously for integrity. Another key one we identified is learning agility. Do they have the ability to figure out new things when the world changes around them? So those characteristics we look for across a variety of different things that we do as we assess those fund managers for their ability to be successful over the following decade.
Yeah, before we take the next question, Barbara, did you want to just comment on the kind of composition of deal flow for Golden Seeds over the years and if it's changed over time?
So, in answer to that question, when I first joined Golden Seeds, we had 3 sectors that we invested in: consumer, tech, and life sciences. Now, since tech is sort of in everything, we recently changed the categories to B2B, B2C, and healthcare. So, so that sort of talks about it a lot. Honestly, when Golden Seeds first started, we had a lot of companies come selling, fashion. Birchbox came to Golden Seeds. There was a lot of fashion. There still are a lot of fashion. A lot of cosmetics, skincare, things like that. We've certainly advanced on the food chain since then, but that's been the major change in deal flow.
Other questions? Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm from the U.S. Fund for UNICEF. I was wondering if you can talk about, we've talked about double bottom line business, and if you talk about how the social impact portion of your investments drive your work and how you report on those, and if you think of, do you have milestones that you reached? Are there North Star metrics that you want to accomplish on the social impact side? And how you think of how difficult it is sometimes to quantify a lot of the impact that your investments are having.
Would you tell me what your definition of social is so that I can be sure I'm responding to it?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm using it broadly now to just apply to any of the investments that you have, but non-revenue generating targets. So if you're investing in an environmental sector company, what were the environmental milestones that you would want to
So if you're investing in an environmentally oriented company,
or across the board, just basically how do you?
But see, you're making it so broad that I can't give you an intelligent answer unless I start breaking it down. So if you look at environmental, you can look at carbon footprint reduction. It's measurable. You don't have to argue about it. If you are looking at healthcare oriented, then it's how many cases or how many lives are impacted by the efficacy of that particular drug. If you are looking at one that's more general, then you look at job creation. Job creation leads to the ability to afford housing, the ability to have education, the ability to have health care. Again, all those things are very measurable. you don't have to argue about, is this a feel-good thing? Like, we spend no time trying to measure things that you could argue about. We only measure things that you can't argue, you know? It's like, if we tried to measure the community engagement stuff, we can describe it, but we don't try to measure it, because, you know, you put a manufacturing facility in a depressed neighborhood, it employs 300 people, what do you think that does to the neighborhood? Pretty good stuff, you know? You at least have food trucks coming there, and the food trucks are having support. You have the dry cleaners being supported. You have little markets that are supported better. So, but we don't try to measure those. We may describe them in a narrative, but the things that we measure are things that you cannot argue with. And I think that's a big part of the approach to impact investing that I would encourage anyway, is especially if you're dealing with institutional LPs, you know, where in some cases all they really care about is, did you get those top tier financial returns? And then they look at the impact stuff as how you differentiate yourself from all the other investors with whom you might compete for a deal.
In the back, I'm curious on your thoughts about companies that are B corporations. Or do you think that designation is superfluous? Do you think it's an incentive to invest? Is it a disincentive?
Who wants to start with this one?
We have some that are, we have most that are not, and we would never invest because it was a B Corp.
We have none that are B Corps. I think it's a fine thing. We would never invest because somebody is a B Corp. I'm personally an investor in a B Corp impact hub. So I'm a believer in the concept, but I do not believe that in an early stage investment pre-public company that has any particular meaning other than signaling the intent or branding the intent of the founders, which is a fine thing.
Other question? Go ahead.
I'm Sarah. I'm from City Lake Capital here in New York. And I wanted to ask both on the entrepreneur side and on the fund side about when you're approaching fundraising, how do you address impact, especially when you're going to some more institutional investors? How do you bring that up? Do you make it a larger part of your pitch, or is it you leave it out for some people, acknowledging that there is still some bias against it in those worlds?
Well, I'll start and say that we exclusively fundraise from either institutions that have an impact allocation that they want to put forward, or high net worth individuals, family offices who want to invest in impact. So, but our particular lens is always around profit first impact investing. And so people that are interested in pure impact without a concern to profit are not our investors. That's just the group that we go after.
And I would say that it's like any other sales process. You want to be sure that you're pitching to qualified investors, and I'm not using the legal qualified, but qualified in that there's some reason that you think that they will be interested in what you're doing. To some extent for us at this point, because we've been doing it for a long time and we're known for it, it's a part of our branding. And so we never go in and try to obfuscate the fact that we're an impact investor. And almost all of our LPs, with the exception of a few high net worth individuals and some very mission-oriented family offices, I'd say 85% of our capital is from what you call rank and file LPs. And in some cases, they do have a pool of money set aside for impact, and that may be defined differently by each of them. When we were raising our second fund, because we were woman-owned, we were able to access certain pots of money. In the third fund, we don't qualify legally as women-owned anymore, but we still are woman-run, because 2 out of 3 of us are women, but we couldn't go over that legal threshold. So there was a pool of money that was not available to us anymore. And our LPs fall into two broad categories. One that says, I want to invest in an impact fund that has top-tier returns, and the other says, I want to invest in a fund that has top-tier returns. And if you can distinguish yourself from your competition through your impact, great.
A friend of mine in Portland, David Chen, runs Equilibrium Capital, and they're a couple $1 billion in debt under management. And his comment is investors come to him for returns and stay for impact. And which I think is a really enlightened way to think about it. If you can, and I think it's just what you're saying, right? If you can clearly say you're delivering the returns, then that's obviously where you want to set first. But they'll stay with you if you have impact.
Jill, did you want to add?
Yeah, and I think for us, the first $50 million that we raised had no one who had any association with a child with autism. And they did it because they thought it was a win-win, and investing in something that's going to do good. But a lot of other things have come out of it. So for example, we are in 30 locations doing a final clinical trial. Some of those locations have they get diagnosed very late. So for example, in Houston, children are diagnosed on the average of 7 years of age, which is very late in the game. So we provide diagnostic services as part of our trial, so many more children actually get diagnosed as a result of our being there, and in other places as well. So there's lots of other impact that we have and that we're starting to look at in terms of course, there's job creation for the manufacturing, and we're employing, there are 30 different universities that have teams that are doing our work. So it's a very intensive place, and I think that, so there's impact in different places, but places that we didn't really actually expect it as well.
Barbara, how do you think about impact, and does it relate to, does Golden Seeds kind of consider itself to have an impact lens, or is it just focused on returns and just with women entrepreneurs?
Well, as I said, when I first joined Golden Seeds, it was really because women didn't have equal access to capital. But it's now defined that investing in women is impact investing. So that's really our baseline. And beyond that, our biggest metric is returns. Our goal is to provide outside returns investing in women-run businesses.
And do you look at any other metrics besides the financial return in terms of, job creation among women, or
Sure,
percentage of the teams?
sure, but that's with all businesses, we are always looking at businesses with that lens. As it magnifies out. I mean, we would never invest in. That we wouldn't invest in a company that we didn't think was, that the business wasn't something that was useful or meaningful. But
yeah, it was
but
really
really,
diversity
it really
lens or
no, really, the woman thing is really our number one thing, and then returns to our
I think we
investors.
probably just have time for one more question for lunch, or maybe two.
Matt Craig with Arabelle Advisors. Well, you had mentioned some alternative exit or self-liquidating structures. Once you have more tools in your toolkit in that respect, where does that fit into your diligence process? And can you speak to the kind of companies that are good candidates for this?
Yeah, and clearly, if you're looking, the way a self-liquidating instrument works is simply you work on a percentage of revenue and a percentage of top-line revenue. And so if you're going to take 10% of top-line revenue or 7% of top-line revenue, your company has to be able to support that in their margin structure. So, so that form of mezz debt is only going to apply to a company that's got a reasonable top-line revenue and a growth curve that you think can then get you paid back in a period of time. And so some it works, some it doesn't. And that's obviously got a key part of the diligence, and it requires a lot more financial diligence. You also might be looking for more securitization in those companies on sometimes personal assets of founders, sometimes on company assets. But fundamentally, you're looking for the revenue. And that's very different than if you're doing it in a very early stage pre-revenue company that you can never apply that model. You wouldn't want to bet on making money on revenue over time. If it's a high growth equity model, that's what you do.
So So I think we have about 2 more minutes, and we can probably take one more question before lunch.
Hi, Diane Key from AFSC. How much of your discernment about making a seed investment has to do with access to capital and personal assets of founders and management team? Because obviously when push comes to shove, if they're having a liquidity crisis, you want to lean on the friends and family of that entrepreneur can save that company until it gets to profitability. I'm just curious how you weigh that as professionals.
Well, we always like entrepreneurs to have some skin in the game. And that varies depending on their wherewithal, but if you don't see that they've invested some personal capital, then it's a little bit of a red flag, I would say.
I maybe there's 2 questions. One is what you just addressed of ensuring they've got some skin in the game and that got them going. The other question is, after your investment, what's going to happen next? And is there a downstream investor that you can identify today who's a likely investor in that company? And if you assume that we're not doing late stage, we're talking about early stage, so they're going to have a continual need for funding in tranches every 12 to 18 months, whatever it might be. You got to make sure that you know where that money is going to come from, because if you don't have a decent theory for where that's going to come from, you ought not to make the investment in the first place.
And just to talk about it a little bit more broadly, I think we're in an environment and have been in an environment since 2008, and there was an earlier situation in 2000 that was very similar to what happened in 2008. So those of us who've been around a really long time have actually seen this movie several times. What that means is that financing risk is as big a risk when you're making the investment as anything else that you can think of. So management risk is always there, market risk, market timing risk, technology risk, product market fit. All of those things are risks, but we're in an environment where I think many times as we look at companies, we believe financing risk is the biggest one. So you want to be sure that you have a strong syndicate. And the strong syndicate is the one way that I know to try to mitigate that risk. And that's difficult in seed investments because by their nature, seed investments don't have strong syndicates, right? They're not, or they wouldn't be called a seed. They would be a strong Series A.
I think it's also a consideration on direct versus fund investing, because if you're direct investing and you're the only person at the table making that, or you and another direct, very small, lightweight, informal syndicate, that's not going to have the ability to let a 2008 happens again. Are you going to be able to make a bridge investment to carry them forward until they can get a larger investment? So I think to your point on it's access to both the immediate syndicate and whatever happens next in both good times and bad. You have to be able to think through those, and the risk is much higher if you're a